So picture this. It's the 28th of the month. You just got paid 5 days ago, like a real paycheck, not a small one. And you open your banking app kind of casually, the way you do when you're not really expecting anything surprising. And then you just stare at the number. Because it doesn't make sense. It genuinely does not compute. You think back through the week and you didn't do anything crazy. You didn't book a flight. You didn't go on a shopping spree. You bought groceries, you put gas in your car, you grabbed coffee a few times, maybe ordered food once or twice when you were tired. Normal stuff. Completely normal, boring adult stuff. And yet somehow 5 days after getting paid, you're already looking at a balance that feels like it belongs to someone who makes half of what you make. And the worst part? You can't even fully explain where it went. That feeling, that specific, slightly nauseating mix of confusion and low-key dread, is something I think about a lot. My name is Tom, and honestly, I've spent probably an embarrassing amount of time obsessing over money. Not in a Wall Street stock ticker kind of way, but more in the psychological, behavioral, why do smart people keep making the same financial mistakes kind of way. I find myself reading studies about spending habits at midnight, or going down rabbit holes about how subscription pricing was designed specifically to be forgettable, or having long conversations with friends about why our generation seems to be perpetually broke in a way that feels different from the brokenness our parents described. And here's what I've come to believe, after all of that thinking. Most people in their 20s aren't struggling because they make bad big decisions. They're struggling because they're slowly being drained by 100 small ones, none of which feel significant in the moment, and all of which are almost completely invisible when you try to look back. What I want to talk about today is what I call the 300 a month trap. And I know that number sounds oddly specific, but stay with me, because by the end of this, I think you're going to look at your bank statement differently. Not in a panicked way, more like the way your eyes adjust when you walk into a dark room and suddenly you can see everything that was always there. This isn't about telling you to stop buying coffee. That advice is tired and, frankly, kind of insulting. This is about something deeper, something structural, something that was, in a lot of ways, built to keep you exactly where you are. Let's start with the actual math, because I think once you see it laid out plainly, something kind of clicks. $300 a month. That's the number I keep coming back to. And the reason is that, in my experience talking to people in their 20s about money, $300 a month is roughly the gap between what most people think they're spending on non-essential recurring costs and what they're actually spending. It's not always exactly 300. Sometimes it's 250, sometimes it's 400. But there's almost always a gap, and it almost always lives in that range. Think about your subscriptions for a second. Not just Netflix. I mean, really think. Netflix, sure. Spotify, maybe Hulu or HBO Max or both, because one of them had a show you wanted to watch and you told yourself you'd cancel after. Amazon Prime, which you justify because you order things sometimes. Maybe a gym membership you use inconsistently. A cloud storage plan. An app you subscribed to 6 months ago and genuinely cannot remember the name of right now. Some kind of premium tier for something. LinkedIn maybe, or a meditation app, or a news site you signed up for during a free trial. Individually, none of these feel like a big deal. $7 here, $15 there, $12.99, $9.99. The pricing is deliberately designed to sound trivial. There is an entire field of behavioral economics dedicated to the psychology of the sub-$10 price point, and the conclusion is basically, humans are very bad at accumulating small numbers mentally. We experience a $15 charge, the same emotional way we experience a $3 charge. They both feel like a little bit of money. Our brains don't naturally add them up in real time. So you've got, let's say, 8 subscriptions. 8 doesn't sound like a lot. But 8 subscriptions averaging $12 each is almost $100 a month on things you're often barely using. And that's just subscriptions. That's before we get to the other stuff. There's the food spending that's not quite dining, out but not quite cooking either. The DoorDash orders, the Uber Eats, the I'll just grab something quick. Stops that happen 3 or 4 times a week because cooking requires planning, and planning requires mental energy. And mental energy is something 20-somethings are frequently running low on for very understandable reasons. There's the impulse buying that's fueled by algorithms so finely tuned to your preferences that scrolling Instagram or TikTok is basically walking through a store designed specifically for you by someone who has studied you for years. There's the social spending, the rounds of drinks, the Venmo requests for group dinners, the concert tickets, the birthday dinners at restaurants you wouldn't normally go to, which is genuinely one of the hardest categories to cut because it's tangled up with relationships and belonging and not wanting to be the person who always says no. Add it all up honestly, and you'll find the $300. Sometimes more. And here's the thing that really gets me. $300 a month is $3,600 a year. Invested consistently over 10 years at a modest return, that's somewhere in the neighborhood of $60,000 to $70,000. That's a down payment. That's a fully funded emergency fund, and then some. That's the difference between someone who feels financially anxious at 40 and someone who doesn't. It's not nothing, it's actually a lot. Now I want to be careful here because I'm not interested in doing the generational blame thing. The avocado toast conversation is one of the most useless conversations in personal finance, and anyone still having it is missing the point entirely. But I do think there's something worth acknowledging. 20-somethings today are navigating a financial landscape that is genuinely more complicated and more psychologically demanding than the one their parents faced. And part of understanding the trap is understanding why it's so much easier to fall into now. Here's one piece of it. The subscription economy was deliberately built around the psychology of forgetting. When you buy something with cash, like physical cash, you feel it. There's a thing called the pain of paying, which is a real psychological phenomenon where the act of handing over money creates a mild emotional sting that makes you more conscious of what you're spending. Digital payments reduce that pain. Automatic recurring payments basically eliminate it. The moment a charge becomes automatic, it stops feeling like a choice. It recedes into the background of your financial life, like furniture you stop noticing after a while. And companies know this. The entire subscription model is predicated on the fact that people will not cancel even when they stop using the product, because canceling requires a conscious active decision, and our default human state is inertia. There's a study, I find, myself referencing this whenever I talk about subscription spending, where people were asked to estimate their monthly subscription costs before actually reviewing their statements. On average, people underestimated by about 40%. 40%. That's not a rounding error. That's a structural blind spot baked into how our brains handle recurring low-cost payments. And then layer on top of that the sheer volume of things competing for your subscription dollars. When streaming first started, there was Netflix, and that was basically it. Now there are dozens of platforms, and they've all fragmented the content in a way that makes you feel like you need multiple subscriptions just to watch the things people are talking about. The market has evolved specifically to extract more from you. And it's done so in small enough increments that the extraction feels painless. Then there's the lifestyle inflation problem, which is maybe the quieter half of the trap. When you're 22 and making $30,000 a year, you live accordingly. You have roommates. You cook most of your meals. You find free things to do on weekends. You're resourceful in ways you don't even really think about because resourcefulness is just survival. Then you get a raise, or a new job, or a promotion. And something subtle happens. Your spending quietly expands to fill the new space. Better apartment, your own place maybe, nicer grocery store, cabs instead of the subway when it's raining, dinner at actual restaurants instead of the cheap noodle place, and none of these individual upgrades feel extravagant. They feel like reasonable rewards for working hard and moving forward. But what often happens, and this is the part nobody warns you about, is that your spending inflates faster than your income or at exactly the same rate, so that the gap between what you earn and what you keep never actually widens. You make more. You feel like you should have more to show for it, and you don't, and that is a deeply disorienting experience. Okay, so I want to go a level deeper here because I think understanding the why behind your spending patterns is genuinely more useful than any budgeting tip I could give you. Here's a framing I find really useful. Most unnecessary spending is not actually about the thing you're buying. It's about a feeling you're trying to either create or escape. That sounds almost too simple, but sit with it for a second. When you order food delivery at 11 p.m. on a Tuesday instead of cooking, it's probably not because you love the specific restaurant. It's because you're tired and cooking feels like one more task at the end of a day that already had too many tasks, and the act of ordering, the scrolling, the choosing, the clicking, gives you a small sense of control and comfort. You're not buying pad thai. You're buying the feeling of being taken care of without having to ask anyone. When you scroll through your phone and buy something you didn't plan to buy, it's often because you're bored or understimulated or vaguely anxious. And shopping, even online, even passively, and triggers a small dopamine hit that temporarily relieves that feeling. You're not buying a thing. You're buying a brief neurological vacation. When you say yes to social spending you can't really afford, it's frequently because the social cost of saying no feels higher than the financial cost of saying yes. And in the moment, it genuinely is. The fear of missing out, of seeming cheap, of not being included, is a very real psychological pressure. You're not buying drinks. You're buying belonging. I'm not saying any of this to make you feel bad. I'm saying it because once you can name what you're actually paying for, you start to have real choices. Because the question stops being, should I spend this money, and becomes, is this actually solving the problem I think it is? And often the honest answer is no. The pad thai doesn't actually make you feel cared for by the next morning. The thing you impulse bought gets added to a pile. The night out is fun, but the anxiety about money comes back the next day, sometimes heavier than before. This is the trap within the trap. The spending is trying to solve emotional problems, and it's not very good at it, and so the emotional problems persist, and so the spending continues. It's a loop. And the reason it's so hard to break is that the relief is real. It's just temporary. Can I take a small detour here? Because I think there's another dimension to this that doesn't get talked about enough, and it has to do with social media and the very specific kind of financial anxiety it creates. There's a phenomenon I've started thinking of as the comparison economy, and it works like this. You are constantly, unconsciously benchmarking your life against the curated highlight reels of the people you follow online. This is not new information. Everyone knows social media is filtered and unrealistic. But what I don't think we fully appreciate is how specifically this affects financial behavior. When you see someone your age, someone you went to school with, or someone you follow because they seem aspirational, posting about a trip they took, or an apartment that looks like a catalog shoot, or a dinner at a restaurant you've been wanting to go to, something happens neurologically. It's not just envy in a simple sense. It's more like a recalibration. Your brain, which is constantly trying to understand what normal looks like for someone in your position, updates its model. And the new model says, people like me do things like this. People like me have things like this. And then the next time you have the opportunity to do or buy something similar, the psychological resistance is lower, because your brain has quietly filed it under normal rather than aspirational. This is not a willpower failure. This is neuroscience. We are wired to calibrate our sense of normal based on our social environment. The problem is that our social environment has been artificially inflated by a platform whose entire business model depends on making you feel like everyone around you is living better than you are. And the financial consequences of this are significant and under-discussed. People in their 20s are spending money they don't have to approximate a lifestyle they see on their phone without ever fully consciously deciding to do so. The spending happens at the margins, in small increments, guided by a sense of what's normal that has been quietly distorted by an algorithm. Here's something I've thought about a lot, and it might be the most important section of this whole conversation. The $300 a month trap doesn't just cost you money. It costs you options, and options, the ability to make choices about your life without being constrained by financial stress, are maybe the most valuable thing money can actually buy. Not stuff, not status. Options. When you have no financial cushion, every decision you make carries more weight than it should. You can't take a job that pays less but would make you happier because you need the income. You can't leave a bad relationship if you're financially dependent on the other person. You can't take a few months to figure out what you actually want to do with your career because you can't afford a few months without a paycheck. You can't say no to the boss who's treating you badly because you need this job and you know it. And worse, they know it. Financial fragility doesn't just affect your bank account. It affects your confidence, your negotiating power, your ability to be the person you want to be in your relationships and your work. Money stress is one of the leading contributors to anxiety and depression in adults under 35. It strains relationships. It affects sleep. It sits in the background of your life like a low-grade hum that never quite goes away. And here's the part that I find genuinely unfair, for lack of a better word. The people who most need financial breathing room are often the least able to access it, because the trap is designed in a way that feels perfectly reasonable from the inside. You're not making crazy decisions. You're making normal decisions in an environment that has been very carefully constructed to extract money from people who aren't paying close attention. But here's the flip side, and this is the part I want you to hold on to. The gap is findable. The $300 is almost always there, in your spending, hiding in plain sight. And once you find it, once you actually look at where it's going and make conscious choices about what's worth it and what isn't, you start to build something that's more valuable than the money itself. You build agency. Okay, I promised this wouldn't be a stop buying coffee lecture, so let me make good on that. What I'm going to suggest is not a budget. Or it's not a traditional budget, because traditional budgets require a level of ongoing tracking that most people are not going to sustain, and I'd rather give you something imperfect that you'll actually do than something perfect that you'll abandon after 2 weeks. The first thing I want you to do is something I call the subscription audit. Set aside 30 minutes, just 30 minutes, and go through your last 2 months of bank and credit card statements. Specifically, look for recurring charges. Write every single one down with the amount. Don't judge yet. Just find them. Then for each one, ask yourself one question. If this service announced it was shutting down tomorrow, how upset would I be? Not would I be mildly inconvenienced, but genuinely upset. If the answer is honestly not that upset, that's a signal. Cancel it, or at minimum downgrade it. You are not depriving yourself. You are redirecting money from things you barely notice toward things that actually matter to you, or toward a future version of yourself who has options. The second thing is what I call a spending pause. Not forever, just 48 hours. When you're about to buy something unplanned, anything over, let's say, $25, you wait 48 hours before completing the purchase. That's it. You don't tell yourself you can't have it. You just wait. What you'll find pretty consistently is that about 60 to 70% of those purchases you simply forget about. The impulse passes. The emotional need it was trying to meet gets met some other way, or just dissipates. And the ones you come back to after 48 hours are the ones you actually wanted, not the ones the algorithm wanted for you. The third thing, and this one is maybe the most psychologically powerful, automate your savings before you automate your spending. Most people's financial plan, implicitly, is to spend what they spend and save whatever's left over. And whatever's left over is usually very little or nothing, because spending expands to fill available income. The fix is to reverse the order. Decide on a savings number, even if it's small, even if it's $50 a month, and set up an automatic transfer to a separate savings account on the day you get paid, before the money hits your regular account, before you have a chance to spend it. Out of sight, out of mind works in reverse too. Money you never see, you don't spend. And over time you adjust your lifestyle to what's available in your main account, which is now less, which means you naturally spend less, without the ongoing willpower cost of consciously restraining yourself. Start small if you need to. The habit matters more than the amount. And the fourth thing, and I want to be honest that this one is harder because it's social, is to get comfortable with occasional selective honesty about money with the people in your life. You don't have to broadcast your financial situation, but having 1 or 2 people you can be real with about money, people you can say, hey, I'm trying to be more careful with spending right now. Can we find something cheaper? 2 is genuinely valuable. Because isolation around money stress makes it worse, and a lot of unnecessary social spending happens because everyone in the group is silently pretending they can afford more than they can. Chances are, if you say it, you'll find out other people feel exactly the same way, and the dynamic shifts. I want to zoom out for a second because I think it's easy to hear everything I've just said and feel like this is all about discipline, and I want to push back on that framing. Discipline is a part of it, sure. But I think the more useful frame is awareness. The trap works because it's invisible. The subscriptions auto-renew. The algorithm serves you ads tuned to your psychology. The social comparison happens below the level of conscious thought. The spending that's trying to solve emotional problems doesn't announce itself as such. The whole system is designed to operate in your blind spots. And the act of simply making these things visible, of actually looking at where your money goes, of asking what a purchase is really doing for you, of noticing when your sense of normal has been calibrated by someone else's highlight reel, is itself a form of financial power. You don't have to be perfect. You don't have to optimize every dollar. You don't have to go full minimalist and deprive yourself of everything enjoyable in the name of compound interest. That's not the point, and honestly, it's not sustainable anyway. The point is just to close the gap, to find the $200, $300 a month that's quietly leaking out without giving you much back, and to redirect it, even partially, even imperfectly, towards something that actually serves you. Because here's what I genuinely believe after all the time I've spent thinking about this stuff. The biggest financial difference between people who feel secure in their 30s and 40s and people who don't isn't income, it's not talent, it's not even luck, entirely. It's the small decisions made consistently over a long period of time in moments that felt too small to matter. The $300 feels small, but the life it builds over 10 years is not small at all. At some level, you already know most of this. Don't think I've told you anything today that's genuinely shocking. The subscription creep, the emotional spending, the comparison trap, the lifestyle inflation. Some part of you has already recognized these things in your own life, probably. You've had that moment of opening your banking app and not being able to explain the number. What I hope today did was give you a framework for understanding why it's happening, not just that it's happening. Because you can't fix something you can't see, and you can't change a behavior without understanding what it's actually serving. The trap is real. It's structural. It was in many ways built by very smart people who spent a lot of money figuring out exactly how to keep you inside it. And that's not a paranoid conspiracy theory, and it's just how markets work. The subscription economy, the attention economy, the influencer economy, they all profit from your spending, and they've all gotten very good at making that spending feel natural and inevitable. But it's not inevitable. That's the whole point. The $300 is findable. The awareness is available to anyone willing to spend an afternoon actually looking. The habits, the subscription audit, the spending pause, the automated savings, the honest conversations are available to you right now, today, without any special tools or willpower or perfect conditions. And I know start small sounds a little anticlimactic. I know you were maybe hoping for something more dramatic. But I think there's something actually kind of beautiful about the small version of this. The idea that 30 minutes reviewing your subscriptions, or one automatic transfer, or one honest conversation with a friend could quietly set something in motion that changes the shape of your financial life years from now. You're not behind. You're just in the trap, like most people your age, because the trap is well-designed and pervasive and nobody sat you down and explained how it worked. Now someone has, and that changes things. Not all at once, not dramatically, but genuinely. Go find your $300.